The judge didn't look angry. That's when everyone knew something unexpected was coming. The middle-aged man stood quietly in the courtroom, hands clasped in front of him, eyes fixed on the floor for a moment longer than necessary. On paper, his case looked simple. A small violation, the kind most people would brush off as a minor inconvenience. But for him, it wasn't small at all. It felt heavy. It felt personal. It felt like another reminder of how easily life can slip out of balance. He took a breath before speaking, not because he was nervous about the judge, but because explaining his situation meant admitting something difficult. He wasn't there to fight the charge. He wasn't there to argue technicalities. He acknowledged the mistake openly. One wrong decision, one moment of bad judgment. That was all it took for a fine to appear in his life, growing larger with time, interest, and late penalties. He explained how that single mistake turned into a problem he couldn't solve on his own. The fine came at the worst possible moment. Rent was already overdue. Bills were stacked on the kitchen table, unopened because looking at them only added stress. Work hours had been cut recently, and finding extra income wasn't easy. Every paycheck was already spoken for before it arrived. There was no anger in his voice. No attempt to make himself look like a victim. He didn't blame the system. He didn't blame the officer. He didn't even blame bad luck. He simply explained the facts of his life as they were. Honest, unpolished, real. No excuses. No drama. Just a man standing in front of a judge, hoping that for once, someone in authority would actually listen. He spoke carefully, choosing words that felt respectful, aware that he was in a place where tone mattered as much as truth. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was something about the way he spoke that drew attention naturally. Maybe it was the calm acceptance. Maybe it was the quiet exhaustion underneath every sentence. This wasn't his first challenge in life. He had worked hard for years, doing what he could to stay on track. But sometimes effort isn't enough to protect you from consequences that snowball faster than you expect. One fine becomes two. One missed payment becomes a notice. Suddenly, a small mistake turns into a legal matter, and you're standing in a courtroom wondering how you got there. As he finished speaking, the room slowly fell into silence. Not the awkward kind, the thoughtful kind. People stopped shifting in their seats. Pens paused mid-note. Even the usual background sounds of a courtroom seemed to fade. Everyone could sense that this wasn't just another routine case. It wasn't about the violation anymore. It was about whether the system would see the person behind it. Judge Frank Caprio sat at the bench, listening closely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush the explanation. He reviewed the paperwork in front of him, scanning the details with practiced eyes. Years of experience showed in the way he handled the moment. Calm, focused, patient, the man waited while the judge reviewed the case. His hands tightened slightly, not from fear, but from uncertainty. He didn't know what would happen next. He had done his part by being honest. Now the outcome was out of his control. The courtroom remained quiet as Judge Caprio continued to review the file. The silence stretched just long enough to feel heavy. Long enough for the tension to settle in. Long enough for everyone present to wonder which direction this moment would take. Would the rules be enforced strictly as written? Or would context matter? The man didn't expect sympathy. He wasn't asking for a free pass. He was hoping for understanding. Hoping that the system could recognize the difference between someone trying to avoid responsibility and someone struggling to keep up. As Judge Caprio looked up from the paperwork, the room stayed still. This was the moment where decisions were made, where lives, even in small ways, could change direction. The air felt charged with anticipation, not because the stakes were dramatic on paper, but because they were very real to the person standing there. In that pause, the man's story lingered. A reminder that behind every violation number is a human being. Someone with responsibilities, pressure, and limits. Someone who made a mistake, owned it, and showed up to face it. The tension in the room wasn't about fear of punishment. It was about hope. Hope that fairness could include compassion. Hope that justice could listen before it judged. And as Judge Frank Caprio prepared to speak, everyone understood that what came next would matter far beyond the fine itself. Judge Frank Caprio slowly looked up from the paperwork in front of him. His expression was calm, unreadable but attentive. It was the kind of look that made it clear he wasn't rushing to a conclusion. He wasn't reacting emotionally. He was thinking. measuring not just the facts of the case, but the human story behind them. The courtroom remained completely still. No coughing, no whispering, no movement. In that quiet moment, everyone could feel that something important was about to be said. Judge Caprio had spent decades on the bench. He had heard every kind of explanation imaginable. Some honest, some careless, some carefully rehearsed. But this case felt different. Not because the violation was serious, but because the man standing before him wasn't trying to escape responsibility. He had admitted the mistake. He had shown up. He had spoken honestly. That mattered. The judge leaned slightly forward and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "The law gives me discretion," he said, "and discretion exists for moments like this." There was no dramatic emphasis, no raised voice, just clarity, the kind of clarity that carries weight because it doesn't need force. The words settled into the room slowly, almost gently. For a brief second, the man standing in court didn't react. He wasn't sure what the judge meant yet. His face showed caution rather than relief. Years of experience had taught him not to assume good news too quickly. Judge Caprio continued, explaining that laws are designed to create order, but they are also written with judgment in mind. Discretion is not a loophole. It's a responsibility. It exists so that judges can consider circumstances, intent, and impact, so that justice can be fair, not just strict. Then came the decision. The fine was reduced to 0. No dramatic announcement followed. No applause. No visible celebration. Just a quiet statement that instantly changed everything for the man standing there. It wasn't that the rule was wrong. The violation had happened. The law had been clear. But fairness, in this case, meant recognizing that punishment would not serve a meaningful purpose. It would only add pressure to a situation that was already heavy. Understanding the person behind the violation mattered more in that moment. The man's shoulders relaxed almost immediately. Not in an exaggerated way, but subtly. Like someone who had been bracing for impact and suddenly realized the blow wasn't coming. His hands unclenched. His breathing slowed. The relief wasn't loud. It was deeply personal. He looked up at the judge, eyes filled with gratitude that didn't need to be spoken. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about being treated as more than a case number, about feeling heard. The courtroom didn't react the way people might expect. There were no gasps, no murmurs, no emotional outbursts. Instead, the room reflected. People seemed to sit a little straighter. Some looked thoughtful. Others nodded quietly. Everyone understood that they had just witnessed something meaningful. Not a spectacle, but a lesson. Real justice doesn't shout. It doesn't embarrass. It doesn't seek attention. Real justice listens. Judge Caprio didn't linger on the moment. He didn't turn it into a speech. He simply acknowledged the man, wished him well, and prepared to move on to the next case. For him, this was part of the job, a responsibility he took seriously without ego. But the impact of that decision stayed in the room. It reminded everyone present that authority and compassion are not opposites. That fairness doesn't disappear when kindness is shown. And that discretion, when used thoughtfully, strengthens the justice system rather than weakening it. For the man involved, the moment would stay with him long after he left the courtroom. It would become a reminder that the system can work, that honesty matters, that showing up and taking responsibility still counts for something. For those watching, it reinforced a powerful idea. That justice is not measured only by penalties and enforcement. It is measured by balance, by the ability to see both the rule and the reality. The case ended quietly. Another name was called. The day moved on. But the message remained clear. Sometimes fairness means understanding the person behind the mistake. Sometimes discretion is the most responsible choice. And sometimes the strongest form of justice is the one that listens first.